At times, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder. The far southeast tending to escape the rain, generally remaining dry here. Temperatures, though, remaining above average for the time of year right the way through the rest of the week and into the weekend.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank and, of course, fun every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Dewbs, and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into the things that have got you talking today. And the Halloween fiscal plan has been delayed. I mean, I've got to be honest, who on earth thought it was a good idea to do that on Halloween in the first place? I mean, give me strength. But anyway, they've seen sense and they've decided to move it along for a couple of weeks or so, giving us more time to pontificate on what should be in it. One school of thought is that it's time for austerity. The other says it's time to tax the wealthy and do exactly the opposite of what Liz Truss tried to do when she was in charge. Where do you sit on it all? Which approach would suit you? And we're told, aren't we, we've got to reduce our cigarettes and our alcohol. Now they're coming for your meat, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, apparently you can only have the equivalent of 2 burgers a week. Why? Well, to help save the planet, of course. Are you up for it? Tell me. And Kemi Badenoch, do you remember, just last night, many viewers celebrated when she was appointed the Women and Equalities Minister. But today, there's been a backlash to the appointment. Apparently, she is going to set the equalities progress in this country back by a mile. Will she? Tell me your thoughts on all of that. But first, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening. The top stories on GB News. Rishi Sunak has vowed to rebuild public finances in a way that's fair and compassionate. In his first Prime Minister's Questions session today, Mr Sunak promised to protect the most vulnerable as he addressed what he called the mistakes of his predecessor Liz Truss. The Commons debate, though, was dominated by the reappointment of the Home Secretary after Suella Braverman reportedly breached the ministerial code last week and then resigned. Labour is calling for an inquiry with its leader, Sir Keir Starmer, questioning the new Prime Minister's logic.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised integrity, professionalism and accountability. But then, with his first act, he appointed a Home Secretary who was sacked by his predecessor a week ago for deliberately pinging around sensitive Home Office documents from her personal account.
But Mr Sunak had already explained the reappointment of the Home Secretary in his opening speech.
Well, he asked about the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, what the Home Secretary will be focused on. She'll be focused on cracking down on criminals.
Well, in another U-turn on Liz Truss's policies, the new Prime Minister confirmed he'll be reinstating the ban on fracking in England. Rishi Sunak told the House of Commons today he stands by the Conservative 2019 manifesto pledge of banning drilling for shale gas. And the Chancellor has delayed the announcement of the government's economic plan by 2 weeks. Jeremy Hunt saying the medium-term plan, which was due to be announced next Monday, will now be upgraded to an autumn statement. He says it'll be accompanied by a full forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility and delivered on the 17th of November.
I have demonstrated in the short time that I've been Chancellor that I'm willing to take decisions very quickly, and I'm willing to make choices that are politically embarrassing if they're the right thing to do for the country, if they're in the national interest. Now we have a new Prime Minister and the prospect of much longer term stability for the economy in the country. And in that context, a short 2.5-week delay is the best way we will make sure that it is the right decisions we take.
Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, accused the Conservatives of crashing the economy and said there needs to be a clear plan now from the government.
After the damage of the last 12 years, where our economy has been neglected, wages have been stagnant and public services are on their knees, then coupled with the absolute car crash of the economy in the last few weeks, what this country needs, I think, is stability, seriousness, and a plan that can take us forward as a country rather than the utter chaos that we've seen from this government.
In other news today, 2 members of a grooming gang operating in Rochdale 10 years ago have lost an appeal against deportation back to Pakistan. Adil Khan and Kari Abdul Rauf were convicted on a series of sex offences against young girls in 2012. Both have fought legal battles to stay on in the UK on the grounds of their human rights. But immigration judges ruled the 2 men should be deported for the public good, saying Khan had shown a breathtaking lack of remorse. Now, GB News has been told the authorities fear a migrant processing centre in Kent could erupt into serious disorder due to the living conditions inside. The RAF facility near Ramsgate is reportedly overcrowded, with some migrants spending far longer there than would normally take to process them. Fights and assaults on staff are a regular occurrence at the base, along with outbreaks of illness. There were 7 security incidents last night alone, we're told. An independent inspector says he was left speechless when he witnessed the conditions. And a group of armed men have attacked a Shiite Muslim shrine in Iran, killing at least 15 people, 40 days since a young Iranian woman died in custody. Local news agencies have reported security forces clashing with protesters over the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. She died in Tehran last month after being arrested by the morality police for allegedly wearing her hijab too loosely. The attack is on the same day as a memorial service for the young woman, where Iranian riot police reportedly opened fire on 10,000 mourners. TV, online and DAB+ radio, you're with GB News. Time now to go back to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, I'm with you right through until 7 o'clock this evening, and keeping me company in the studio is my panel. We've got Daniel Moylan, who's a Tory peer in the House of Lords and the former advisor to Boris Johnson, and Laurie Lebon, who's an environmental researcher. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Man's nights, men's nights. Well, I do like one of them. If we can say such things these days, I don't know. Anyway, you know the drill, don't you? It's not just about us 3 here tonight. It's about you at home as well. I want all of your thoughts thoughts. You can get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.uk is my email address, or you can tweet me at gbnews. Lots of you, by the way, getting in touch already tonight about some of these topics. I was asking you about meat, wasn't I? I mean, let me just get your names up here. John, you say nobody. And you put it in capitals again. Nobody, you say, will ever tell you what you can and can't eat. You're saying good luck with that. David says pretty much exactly the same. Sarah, you are in the same camp there. But is there anyone out there that is not a meat eater that actually thinks, yeah, absolutely spot on, we should be eating less meat? Get in touch, many of you as well, getting in touch tonight about fracking. You're calling it a monumental blunder, says one of my viewers. Of course, talking about Rishi's announcement on the fracking ban earlier on today. And a special announcement, ladies and gentlemen. Do you remember last week? I was allowed out in a bar, none less, a cricket club to be precise, over in Kent. Well, I had such a good time that I'm repeating it again this week. So tomorrow, if you are in Uxbridge, now we know why that's it's slightly famous, that constituency, don't we? Boris Johnson, of course, is the MP there. Well, I'm going there, and I will be in front of a live audience because, you know, you'll know by now anyway, on GB News, it's not just about us sitting there and talking at you. We like to talk to you. We like to know what is going on in your mind. So if you are in or around Uxbridge, come and join me. What a treat for you. What a way to spend your Thursday evening. Go to the GB News website for details, gbnews.co.uk, and look for the People's Forum. I'm very much looking forward to that. Nigel's show as well will be live from there straight after mine. I'll be on at 6 and he will be on as usual from there at 7 o'clock. What a treat. Right, it is his first full day then in office, isn't it? I refer, of course, to our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. And you will have seen by now that the so-called fiscal statement that was planned for October, I mean, by the way, I don't even know who dreams up these kind of schemes. Who in their right mind in the Tory party would be sitting there and thinking that Halloween was a perfect time to launch some kind of fiscal statement? I despair sometimes because I think, don't you have people there that have just got basic common sense and would apply it to such timings? But alas, no. Anyway, it's been kicked into the long grass for about a couple of weeks or so, which gives me the opportunity to pontificate about what should be in it. Daniel Moylan, some people are saying that what they're hoping for and wanting from Jeremy Hunt is basically a war on wealth. They're saying that the problems in this country can be tackled by getting hold of the wealthy, squeezing them more and getting the money from them. Other people say, no, it's time for austerity for everyone. Where do you sit?
Well, before I come to that, I need to say the government's in a real problem at the moment because they've got to get the Office for Budget Responsibility to give the approval to their sums, because otherwise they're worried the markets will take fright. And so the OBR is basically in there in Jeremy Hunt's office dictating what can be in the budget. And it's not just about tax and spend, it's also about they want more immigration and things like that, because that helps their model, the model they calculate these things on. This is beginning to look really horrendous. And there were reports in the papers this morning that they could be looking at cuts of up to 10 or 15% in departmental expenditure in order to make the sums add up and get the OBR on side. And the explanation for the delay was that Rishi wants to actually, before he presents this shock, would actually like to understand it and see what can be done about it. So they're in real difficulties. Now, there are people who say, oh, you can save all this money painlessly. You won't even notice it because there's all these people out there called the rich. And if we just took the rich people's money away from them, then everything would be milk and honey elsewhere in the country. Well, the fact of the matter is that the amount of money you can raise from the rich is very, very much smaller than you might think. There aren't that many rich people lying around with lots of money to spare. The money you'd raise would be quite small. The fact is, you're not going to get away with it painlessly. It's a form of self-delusion to think that you can do everything the government has set out to do, and I'm not sure I agree that it is the right thing to do. They had a choice, Tory MPs, between a Liz Truss policy and a Rishi Sunak one, and they went solidly for Rishi Sunak, and they knew that meant austerity. But you're not going to solve austerity by saying there's this mythical stuff out there about the rich. And frankly, the rich are quite good at moving elsewhere.
They certainly are. Laurie, where do you stand on it?
So let's just think about what the challenge that the government is facing. They've lost credibility, or a lot of credibility in the eyes of the people that lend the government money, right? That's fundamentally what's happened. In the same way that, if I was seen drunk and flashing the credit card in front of my bank manager, they'd probably raise questions about my credibility to get that money, right?
They'd probably be sat next to you drinking the champagne with you.
My bad, yeah. And there are a number of ways that you can try and re-establish that credibility. One is a kind of desperate overcorrective austerity to say, look, actually, no, I'm credible because I'm going to really cut back on my spending. That's a bit of a false economy now. The lack of investment in things like our healthcare system, education and so on have got so bad that they are impediments to growth, impediments to us creating wealth. So that's a dead end. There are other ways to do it, to plug this gap, to look credible. One of them is to start to look at taxing some of the mega profits, for example, that have been made in the cost of energy and cost of living situation. Many of the energy companies have made bumper profits that they weren't expecting, that they've not earned because they're doing anything new or productive. They just come out of nowhere with high prices. And then another one that I think predates the cost of living is equalising the tax on capital gains, so on earning money from stocks and shares if you're already wealthy, to make it the same as the taxes we have to pay on our income. I think it's fundamentally unfair, not right, that someone, say, working in a supermarket or whatever, where they get their money from working, is charged more tax than people who get their money from owning assets and just sitting and letting the money come in. So that's a different route that I think is more credible, because we need these investments in public services.
Yeah, except there won't be any capital gains, will there, as you go into a recession? There'll be all capital losses. There won't be any tax to collect. I mean, I agree with you. In the sense, I agree that the allowance on capital gains that you get 9,000 or whatever it is, but that is an anomaly, and if that went, I wouldn't object to that and tax it on the same basis as income. I haven't got a problem with that. But again, it's this idea that there's something out there that you can just do this and be painless and it solves all the problems. It won't. The great thing about income tax and other taxes that we collect is they're regular and stable, whereas things that depend on the value of wealth are unpredictable sources of income.
Agreed.
That's the reason that tax authorities don't go after them, is they don't really help you.
But the immensely frustrating thing here is that we've, as a country, been put into this situation because of the incompetence of the last Tory administration.
Put into this situation because and this is the other thing. We've been put into this situation because we have been printing money, living off printed money for the last 12 years, and that went into complete overdrive during COVID. And the main problem facing this country at the moment is not debt or the markets. The main economic problem I mean, is actually rampant inflation as a result of living off printed money. And what that actually requires is higher interest rates. And this is another criticism I've got. The government is focusing on sorting out the fiscal situation, that's to do with tax and spending, and they're not being sufficiently tough on monetary policy, because defeating inflation, which destroys everything, and believe me, you're too young, but it does, because I've lived through it. Defeating inflation should be their top priority, and that would mean higher interest rates. So that's what's actually caused the problem. Hundreds of billions of pounds of printed money that doesn't exist being added into the economy and pushing prices up.
But alongside that, as one of the many problems we face, we also face the problem of underinvestment in things like public services, which are a drag on our productivity and growth. We also face the external inflationary shock of high energy prices, high food prices, and so on. And those things could be sorted out with some investment, which would require borrowing. We were in the situation before Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss lobbed a grenade into the economy, shattered much of the credibility that the British government had in the bond markets with the public finances, where I think we could have been making those investments. And we're now in this parlour state because of Tory decisions.
Because let me tell you, the really interesting figure is that we have been spending more and more and more on public services. In 2000, we spent 35%, the government spent 35% of national income. Since COVID, the government has been spending closer to 48% of national income. What the government is now spending is actually killing the private sector and the productive sector and the wealth-creating sector. And your solution to that is, we need to spend more money.
My solution... My solution... That's a mischaracterisation. My solution is that you spend money on capital investments in education, in healthcare and so on. The private sector will benefit from this. George Osborne cut those capital investments. The basic maintenance bill for the National Health Service is nearly £10 billion. That is a problem.
So we should have backed Boris's 40 new hospitals.
You took 100%, and then we shouldn't have allowed a Tory government to dash the credibility of the British government.
We carry on building HS2.
Our options to be able to do so have been limited by mismanagement, by Tory mismanagement.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but this sounds like Boris's programme. You want to spend money on capital investment in the public sector, HS2, 40 new hospitals, new school. I mean, Gordon Brown built a lot of new schools, so I don't think we need a lot of new schools, actually. I think that estate is in fairly good nick. But building money on hospitals and railways and things like that, that's the Boris Johnson prescription. Bring him back.
You want Boris back?
Well, that's what Laurie seems to be saying.
Laurie
seems
do you
to be
want
saying
Boris
Boris
back?
is
Our new Prime Minister has said that he's going to stick to the 2019 manifesto. And so I hope when we get our fiscal statement that the massive investments in capital investments will be maintained.
Well, that's not what the Tory MPs voted for. Let's see.
There's a couple of things then I want to unpick on all of this. One of the aspects that many of my viewers are writing in about, in fact, David, just as I've said that, you've got good timing, David, there, because as I'm just about to say, you tear it up, is fracking. So we will have seen today the fracking ban basically reintroduced by Sunak. Where do you stand on that? I'll start with you, Laurie. Good idea, bad idea, or what?
I'm pretty relaxed about it because the business case for fracking doesn't really exist. The market for selling gas is international. It's largely across Europe. If we were getting gas out of the ground, if it were geologically possible, if voters did support it, both of which are in question, but let's say they did, it will get sold on that market. So it won't make our energy prices any cheaper.
And I want to talk in a bit more detail after the break,
if we
by the way,
nationalise the companies.
I want to talk in a bit more detail about the whole climate thing after the break. But fracking particularly, was Sunak right or wrong today?
I'm afraid I'm now of the view that a ban on fracking, especially in current circumstances, is foolish. I think fracking should be allowed. I think it's perfectly reasonable to put limitations on fracking if it's going to cause geological problems in close to or in inhabited areas. I think that's very sensible. I think it's perfectly reasonable to talk about compensation for disruption to people who'd be affected by noise or things like that. That's also perfectly acceptable. But that isn't what he's discussing. It appears to be, I don't think he said it explicitly, but it appears to be a sort of ban in principle. I think that's mad.
And I want to explore this capital position because Laurie makes a point, and a lot of people will agree with your point, that why should assets have a separate tax class, if you like, to income? Your point, Laurie, is that actually, you know, if you go out and graft, then you have to pay X%. So why, if you've got something that's sitting there in the background going up, should you get a completely different tax rate? What would you say to people that share Laurie's view?
Well, I'd say I don't think... I've always shared Laurie's view on that in principle. If there's an appropriate allowance for inflation so that you don't just get taxed on an inflationary increase over time, then I think that's perfectly reasonable.
So
I haven't got a problem with that.
taxes, basically, on capital gains.
But at the moment you pay capital gains tax, and income tax is a bit higher. The rate's a bit higher, and you get an extra allowance in capital gains. And if that was changed, I wouldn't have a problem with that. Can I just explain? If you're a taxman, though, that isn't very attractive. The reason the taxman goes after things like income and VAT is because you can broadly plan what they are, and they're stable, and small rates bring in large amounts of money. Whereas going after wealth-type taxes, those are taxes which, if wealth goes up and down, as it does with the economy, then just when you need the money, there's nothing to tax. And that's why they're not that interested. And it's hard to make capital gains. There aren't that many people making capital.
And on capital gains, you want assets, so-called assets, to be applied with income tax rates, right? So what about if you own a house, so your home goes up in value, and then you decide to move somewhere else? What about that capital growth? Should that be applied to income tax?
I think that, as a general principle, the sort of income that you're earning, money that you're getting in, that's not based upon your labour. Well, there should be an equalisation there. I think that's a matter of principle.
I need to push you on it. So your house that you've bought, you've done absolutely. So I'm going to apply your capital gains process to your thought process to your house. I'm not talking about second houses, for anyone says. I'm talking about your primary residence, which currently is exempt from capital gains. So you buy this house, you do absolutely nothing apart from live in it. And then over 10 years, it's gone up, I don't know, 200 grand, not for any reason, not for your labour, your sweat, your toils, your tears, just because of market conditions. Should you have your income tax applied to that growth?
As someone who is younger, I'm attracted to that idea because I look at people who happen to be born 10 years before me, or 20 years or 30 years before me, and they have made huge amounts of money just because of the time that they were born. On the flip side, though, the way that the economy is currently constructed, a lot of us are going to have to rely on that increased housing wealth. So I find it very difficult to come down on a specific element there. I find it much easier to say capital gains tax on people who are earning a huge amount of money, say, on stocks and shares and so on. I can see that's a very clear case. For housing, it's harder because of the reliance that a lot of us have on that as a means for us to generate our wealth.
You see, one of the things that I always find fascinating about tax conversations is that so many people are in favour of increasing taxes for other people. So any other tax bracket, anywhere else, yeah, definitely raise it, raise it, raise it. When you then start to bring it to the actual individual involved, and then you start to kind of, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about generally, then you start to say to that person, right, so should we apply this to you? Should we apply, oh, no, not to me, no, to the wealthy. So I guess my question for you guys at home watching or listening tonight is, what is wealthy? What does that mean to you? What is the rich? Because everyone will have this sentiment, let's tax the wealthy, let's tax the rich. What does that mean to you? Because I don't know, if you earn, say, 20 grand a year, to you, someone that's wealthy might be someone that earns 40. If you're someone that earns 40, you might be sitting there thinking, well, I'm definitely not wealthy. The wealthy person is 100, and on and on and on we go. So my question for you to ponder whilst I go to a break is, what is wealthy? See, I'll get you with that one, I'm sure, because it fascinates me, the answers to that. But I'm going to take a break. When I come back, I want your thought. Well, I've got lots of thoughts already in terms of what you guys have to say on the topics tonight: taxation, austerity. I want to talk to you about meat as well. Can anyone tell you how much meat you can eat or should eat because of the climate? And Kemi Badenoch as well. Good appointment as Women and Equalities Minister or not? Tell me your thoughts on all of the above, and I'll see you in 2 minutes. Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. And keeping me company in the studio, we've got Daniel Moylan, who's a Conservative peer in the House of Lords and a former advisor to Boris Johnson, and Laurie Leybourne, who's an environmental researcher. Good evening. Hey, by the way, I have to say, Daniel, as I was reading that out then about Boris, I was thinking to myself, you've not had much good luck, have you? Because... yeah, I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but Boris, one camp, the other camp, you voted live on air for Liz Truss.
I am complete disaster. I am the kiss of death. They just have to know I'm voting for them and they are out of the race.
Oh, I was going to say, moral of the story, if Daniel...
Actually, Liz won, which is almost as good as being out of the race.
Well, it didn't end well, did it? I have to say, that's what I was thinking.
Well. They were determined to get her out. I think the truth is the Tory MPs decided early on they wanted Rishi, and when the members didn't give them Rishi, they thought, we'll have another go, and this time we'll cut the members out.
Very quickly,
good luck to them.
As a member who did vote, do you feel cheated that you're excluded from that process this time around?
I recognise the right of the MPs to choose the person they want, but I think they've
he's diplomatic, isn't he, Laurie? He's diplomatic.
I think they've employed quite bullying tactics, and I think a lot of members of the party feel that they have been cut out unfairly, and you have a situation where the person who lost the election, the members' election, is now the Prime Minister. So, there are people just query, what's the point of being a member?
There was the disastrous mismanagement of the economy along the way.
Well, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'd happily argue with that. And I think you will look, it could be in a few weeks' time.
Don't start arguing about the economy again. That was part one, everybody.
But in a few weeks' time, when you see the cuts package and the tax rises that MPs have, in fact, voted for, there might be people like you. I'm not saying I'm going to be one. There might be people saying, bring back the good old days. Wasn't it the good old days of Liz Truss, they might say.
Well, there you go. We've got that on tape.
Quasi's tax cuts and
we've got that on tape. We'll hold him to it. We'll hold him to it.
And if we're on the economy as well.
No, we're not.
I'm not for taxing the wealth on your first home. Second homes, equalising the capital gain tax, yes, just to be clear.
Well, Dak has been in touch saying, Michelle, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't pay capital gains on your primary residence.
Yeah, exactly.
Dak, you didn't pay attention, my friend. I know that you don't pay capital gains now. What I was asking was, on the premise that capital gains should be taxed, this is Laurie's suggestion, not mine, as an income tax situation, I was just posing the hypothetical question. So, yes, I do know my onions, I have to say. Many of you, by the way, getting in touch, Brian, I think you make a very, very good point. You say it shouldn't be taxing, it shouldn't be wealth that's the problem, it should be greed that is the problem. Many of you as well getting in touch saying it's not about the individual, it is more about the companies. You want to see these big corporate profits being taxed, so you do. And by the way, because I did just say I wasn't going to talk about the economy, but I have to get it off my chest. We talk about the economy, don't we? One of the things that many people don't seem to talk about in power at the moment is the fact that actually it was some of these ludicrous COVID policies, the shutting down of the economy that caused many of the problems that we face in our society today. And everyone was as bad as each other. Labour, Tory, they were all at it. They were all wanting more. And unfortunately, there is no such thing as a free lunch, as we are all, unfortunately, finding out right now. Anyway, the economy was part one. If you just tuned in, you missed it, but you can always watch it back on our app or YouTube. Right, let's talk meat, shall we? Are you a meat eater? Do you like it? Apparently now, if we want to help save the climate, we've got to cut our meat eating down. 2 burgers a week or the equivalent is what we should be aiming for. Laurie, people will be sitting at home thinking to themselves, people attack my alcohol consumption, they attack my cigarette smoking, and now they're coming for my meat. They just want to have a burger and be left alone.
Yeah, why? So analyses like these are basically saying if the world food system is very globalised, we get meat and stuff from all over the world, if it stays like it is, with all the costs that then imposed on the environment, like, for example, the bits of the Amazon that are cut down to then whack cattle on, to grow them, to slaughter them, to bring them all the way over to the UK to make food. If it carries on like that, then you would, of course, have to start to minimise the amount of stuff that we eat. What I would say, instead of... I say, well, we need to change the system then. That's the primary thing we need to do. We don't need to be going around and saying, you can't eat this, you can't eat that. We need to change the system so that damage isn't being caused. So, for me, we need to, for example, have much more domestic types of production of our food. We used to be in a situation where the UK grew and produced most of its food, and that situation has diminished as time has gone on. There has been situations where the UK,
well, maybe
after the Second World War,
in the Middle Ages.
After
food import.
Hang on, let him finish.
The history, in large parts, the history of the way that Britain has been fed. Right, ignore the Middle Ages. When there was a British Empire, it was a highly globalised situation. Food was coming from all over the place. Right, in fact, that is reflected in many of our culinary habits now, our love of Indian food, our love of food from all over the world. It's partly a result of that very globalised setup. Then we had the World Wars, and it showed to government, to people, that if we relied on getting so much of our food abroad, that was a risk to our food security. And immediately after the war, the Second World War, you got a process of more of our food being produced domestically. And now we're not back to where we were with the time British Empire, but, you go into Tesco or whatever, and your food is coming from all over the place. You see it on the labels, so it's coming from. So for me, what we need to be talking about here is less, with the current food system, with all the destruction it causes, you've got to only eat 2 burgers. It's, well, we have to change that system so that we can still enjoy the foods that we eat. We can eat better and more nutritious food, but we can do it in a way that isn't leading to the Amazon being cut down and so on.
So for you, it's not necessarily about the concept of the meat eating, it's more about the transportation and all of the air pollution, etc., with transporting things from A to B.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I've got to say, if you were to put it on if I was to tick a box, I guess I would fit the classification of being a meat eater. However, since becoming a mum, I don't know what's happened to me. I think I've gone a bit soft because, Daniel, I feel sorry for the animals now. And I was just watching then, if you're listening on the radio, you wouldn't have seen it, but we had pictures then of cows and sheep, and I'm looking at it. Of course I was listening to you, Laurie, but I was also at the corner of my eye seeing the animals. I was like, oh. So I don't actually eat much meat now.
Well, I think you're perfectly entitled not to eat meat if you don't want to, and if you have reasons for not eating meat, that's absolutely fine. But what we're seeing here is a sort of an ideological commitment that, I'm perfectly happy to accept climate change happens, and I'm perfectly happy to accept that human activity over the last 200 years might contribute to a degree of global warming, in addition to normal climate change that happens in any event as part of the great cycles of the Earth's history. And I think there are things you can do to mitigate that, there are things you can do to respond to it, but we've been driven by the climate people, starting with Al Gore, into a period of panic alarmism. The world is going to end tomorrow. And unless we do massively dramatic things, like stop eating meat. I mean, if I lived on a beach, if I had a house on a beach and I thought the sea level was going to rise, I could do a few things. I might move, up the hill. I might put the house on stilts. I could build a seawall. What I wouldn't do is go down to the beach and talk to the sea and say, if I stop eating meat, will you leave me alone? Because that's really the situation we've been driven into. Or give up the motor. I'll give up the motor and pat the cow on the head. Will you leave me alone? And that's really the situation we've been driven to in by this crazed sort of end of the world Armageddon-like climate alarmism. As far as our food policies are concerned, I'm not aware myself, I've never seen beef from Brazil in British shops. We might import a very small amount, but we're not actually importing meat from Brazil. And we do import food from around the world, but the vast majority.
There's a big chain of Argentinian steaks.
But Argentina. Now I know you know your onions, Michelle, but Argentina is not Brazil, and the Amazon is not in Argentina.
But there are other ecosystems being damaged.
So not just the Amazon. He uses the Amazon as a great sort of totem to wear about. We don't actually import meat from the Amazon, as far as I'm aware, and if we do, it's very, very small. So most of the meat we import, most of the food we import, does come from the European Union. That's for the reasons we know. It's become part of our historical trade over the last 40 years, and so forth. So that's actually where most of it comes from. And I agree. I would like to have more food security if it doesn't cost us too much. I'd like farmers to be told, focus on producing food. At the moment, we send very, very mixed messages to farmers about what we think they should be doing. And I agree with that. And that part I don't have a problem with. But I do think at the same time, going around at the other end and saying to people, you can have the equivalent of 2 burgers and that's it, which you're not saying, but these people are, is just a completely irresponsible, self-defeating, inappropriate, wrong, ineffective, and designed to produce an adverse reaction.
I was just about to say, get off the fence there, Daniel. Why don't you? And by the way, for the record, I don't think Brazil and Argentina are the same place. What I was saying was, your point was more about far-flung places and flying produce in, as opposed to British produced animals, food, veg, whatever it is. Anyway, what do you think, to his point, in terms of the whole alarmist crisis, flashing lights nature of the whole climate conversation at the moment? Is that fair or not?
We are in a very dangerous situation. For example, you can talk to many farmers who will tell you that the only way, if we're talking about food here, the only way we are able to grow crops and we're able to sustain our agriculture is if our ecosystems are kept, we keep ecosystem integrity. If we've led ourselves to a situation where insecticides have killed off the pollinators of the crops, it could lead to these ecosystems breaking down. We are, with the best available evidence, getting to the point where that risk is now pretty high. And so we need to make sure, in the case of agriculture, that we are producing food in a different way that isn't so destructive of ecosystems and so on. And we are in a very dangerous situation. The then suggestions of what we do, I mean, I'd never say we should go and talk to the sea. I think we should change certain ways of producing food. Beef, for example, it requires a lot of water, a lot of carbon and so on to create enough meat that then, we slaughter and eat, and beef and so on and so forth, compared to other alternatives. Now, I think that in the same way that we should be thinking about changing our diets because we're worried about animal rights and the impact upon animals, how they're kept and how they're slaughtered, how we should be changing our diets because of our health, another thing that we should be thinking about is changing our diets based upon what's happening in the environment. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to go and kick in a burger store around the corner now and be like, right, you've had your one burger, now clear off.
But do you think people do think that? So do you think that people watching, because in and around certain parts of London, then I will concede that, there are, like, particularly younger people that are perhaps making diet choices based on what they think is right for the environment. But on the whole, up and down the country, do you think Brian in Wigan is sitting there thinking to himself, well, I was going to have steak and chips tonight, but I don't want to endanger the climate, so I'll have jacket potato?
Celeriac roulade.
Yeah.
I don't know, we should go and ask that person, but we are in a
Let's ask you at home, because there's people here watching this that are not in what I would call the London bubble. But are you listening to this conversation tonight thinking I was going to have a burger for my tea, but because of the climate, I weren't?
So I don't live in London. I grew up in the countryside, and my experience is that farmers are coming round to the fact, they know this, they look after the land, that if you push it too far, if you kill off too many insects, which then means that not many birds come to your land. Right. If you push land too hard, you are going to get to a situation where these ecosystems break.
I don't disagree with you, but you're not talking about climate change anymore.
That is
you're talking about the effect of insecticides, pollinators. I understand all of that, and going too far is a very foolish thing and will cost you. But this was about climate change, and it's really interesting that you've gone right off the topic, that you're not defending what these people are saying.
So the analysis that sits behind this today also includes non-climactic environmental damage, but another one of those systems that could start to break down its stable functioning is the climate system. You just need to talk to farmers this summer about the severe heat waves that we experienced, which we know
the heat waves of my childhood.
No, it was more extreme than the ones in the
well,
past.
you got one day when you measure it at Heathrow and you get 40 degrees at Heathrow.
We had
a very bad place to measure.
The droughts that we experienced in Europe
are
very the worst for 5
centuries.
As far as we know, the droughts across Europe were the worst we've seen in 500
years.
There's
very little indication that these things are becoming more frequent. They're just played up more in the press.
That's not true. The analysis that we now have, very good analysis from fantastic British institutions like the Met Office, show us that these things are more frequent and severe now. And farmers know this and want to change their practices. They're at the forefront, indeed, of changing our practices so that we can keep these systems safe and be able to produce
them safe by changing them.
Well, there you go. I'm going to let these two talk about the sun temperature in the break. But before I do so, just a quick reminder for you lucky people that we will be in Uxbridge tomorrow. What a treat. I absolutely love it. You can stick me in a bar talking to people. I can tell you that is me in my element.
The People's Forum this Thursday is coming to Uxbridge in West London. Yep, that's right. It's Boris Johnson's constituency. We want to find out, what do you think about Boris pulling out of the race? Do you think he'll hold the seat of Uxbridge? Will he even stand in Uxbridge? Is Rishi connecting with you? And what about Keir Starmer? If you want to come along, join the People's Forum, give us your view this Thursday evening. Please go to gbnews.uk.
Well, there you go. If you like the sound of that, get over to our website, gbnews.co.uk for details and for tickets. I will be there from 6 till 7 and Nigel, as you just said, 7 till 8. By the way, I'm very happy indeed because Diana has just been in touch saying, Michelle, my husband is called Brian and he is from Wigan and he has just nearly choked on his dinner. Oh, well, there you go. Well, I'm very happy about that. I found a Brian from Wigan, but I think the point
was
that
this
they're
celery
making...
wasn't cooked properly.
Yeah, I think... Yeah, was it your cooking, Diana, or...
No, it's not Diana's cooking.
Yeah,
Her cooking is excellent, but...
Hey, by the way, it's very misogynistic of me there to imagine that it was Diana doing the cooking at all. It might have been Brian.
It might have been Brian cooking his own dinner.
Yeah, it could have been...
celeriac.
Yeah, it could have been
Celeriac
Brian.
large.
Well, now I'm intrigued. I know I'm going massively off topic, but just tell me, just for my own sanity, basically, who cooked the dinner in your house tonight? Diana, was it you or was it Brian? I want to know. And what did you have, by the way? I'm fascinated. Right, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about Kemi Badenoch. We mentioned this last night, didn't we? She kept her trade remit, but also is now in charge of the Equalities Brief. Many people watching this show were very happy about that news last night, but it's caused a lot of controversy, so it has, everybody. Apparently, she's going to set equalities back by a country mile. Is she? Tell me your thoughts, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Keeping me company in the studio, Daniel Moylan, who's a Conservative peer in the House of Lords and a former advisor to Boris Johnson, and Laurie Leybourne, who's an environmental researcher. Lots of split views on some of that stuff, but I have to say that there is quite a lot of people writing in saying, Michelle, no, they won't be told how many burgers or the equivalent they will be eating anytime soon. Many people going, while you're all talking about climate change, why is nobody ever mentioning population growth? Lots of my viewers are saying that that is a key factor in what's going on in their minds with the climate. Andrew's written in and said, Michelle, Brian can't be from Wigan, otherwise it would be his tea and not his dinner. I mean, I've opened a can of worms here now, haven't I? Because, Andrew, it was Diana that wrote in, not Brian. She wrote in on Brian's behalf, so maybe Diana is not from Wigan, I don't know. But what I am intrigued about is what they're having for the dinner and who cooked it, so get in touch and tell me. We touched on this last night, didn't we? Kemi Badenoch, she has returned to Cabinet. Of course, she's kept her role as international trade, but also she will be in charge of women and equalities. Now, there's been a big backlash against this appointment, so there has. Some quite tough words have been spoken, but the long and short of it is that many people in the LGBTQ plus, I lose track of what the right sentence for that is now, Daniel, but anyway, there's many people saying that this is a massive step backwards for equalities in this country. Is it, Daniel?
Well, Kemi Badenoch is a very interesting politician with lots of potential, and I think it's very brave of Pink News to take on a black woman and say that they're not capable of representing equalities. But the difficulty with this trans thing, which could be, in my view, settled more sensibly, is that the people who are advocating for what they call trans rights assert entirely dogmatically what their position and try to shut down anybody else who speaks about it in a contrary sense. And there's no evidence at all. It's purely a matter of dogma and ideology they're trying to impose on us. And the technique, there's no argument, the technique they're using is bound to provoke an adverse reaction. So they're stoking up these culture wars, in my view. And other people, lots of other people, take a different view and say, I believe the opposite. Show me wrong.
Where do you stand on it, Laurie?
I mean, my general view is that the more we talk about these issues, we're spending less time talking about things like the economic crisis we face, and that's a massive priority for people right now. I find it difficult to sometimes try and cut through a lot of this to and fro debate, a lot of, name calling and other things that's going on. In this case, there seems to be concern, from what I've read, that people are worried about her desire not to have a full ban on conversion therapy, the idea that you can convert people away from their particular sexual orientation or so on. And is it the case that approach to conversion therapy is still being used on people who are trans? And then other times where she's made comments where it's inferred that maybe she doesn't think people can be trans. And I think that if you're an equality minister, you at least have to recognise that the trans community exists.
Of course, they absolutely do exist. I think many people's concerns would be, and I know you can say, well, there's a lot more important things in this issue, but I know there's a lot of people that are concerned about it's the more extreme ideology. It's more the kind of concept that you must think this or else, and there does seem to be like a quite intense edge to some of these conversations.
Well, you must think this or we'll close you down. We'll no platform you, we'll get you sacked from your university, and we'll go on a pile on you on Twitter or whatever to stop you from expressing your views.
Yeah, and
that's where they've gone far too far.
Yeah, and you see teachers these days as well getting fired if they don't use the right pronouns on kids. Anyway, lots of you guys getting in touch tonight about food. You're all telling me what you're eating for your tea. Gavin has said, thank you. After listening to that, I'm now having salad for my tea. Are you? Did you just listen to that and change your diet habits because of what you just heard tonight? And anyway, ladies and gentlemen of the UK, you can all sleep soundly tonight, in case you're wondering, because I've got the answer to my burning question. Here we go. So Brian from Wigan, it was Diana that cooked his tea, and they're having steak pudding and homemade chips. I do like it when I get to the bottom of these pressing issues in our society. But thank you for that, Diana. That is all we've got time for. Laurie and also Daniel, thank you. Many people, by the way, appreciating the debate tonight. Good-spirited, good manners and respectful. I always say that that's exactly how debate should be, and never, hopefully, will we stop debating. Coming up next, Nigel Farage. We, as I told you, will be in Uxbridge tomorrow from 6 with the People's Forum. But for tonight, Nigel, what have you got for us?
Michelle, thank you very much indeed. Well, quite a strong performance in terms of delivery from Rishi Sunak during his first PMQs. It was much more exciting than I thought it might be. But very interestingly, he's reintroduced the ban on fracking. We will not be energy independent under a Rishi Sunak government. I'm debating tonight and asking you at home, has Rishi got this right? All of that in just a few minutes.
Hello, changeable is certainly the theme for our weather through the rest of this week and into the weekend. Tonight remains very mild for just about all of us, breezy conditions, and there is some showery rain heading in our direction. Now, the reason for the changeable setup, low pressure dominating the weather, and these weather fronts swinging in from the southwest as we head through tonight and into the early hours of tomorrow morning. The remnants of this morning's weather front still affecting the far north and northern Isles of Scotland. Meanwhile, the next batch of showery rain pushes in from the southwest through the course of tonight and into the early hours of tomorrow morning. Some heavy bursts in that at times, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder, but temperature-wise, not falling very low at all, well above average for this time of year. So we start Thursday on a mild night.